So, we are interested. So we are interested in putting a temporary ferry dock in to run a pilot study for 3 to 4 months this summer. We are coming before you because the place where the dock would go would be where the dock used to be. So there was a dock in the East Channel, and you can see these photographs show the old pilings.
That's the old oil dock.
No, this is further down. The oil dock is underneath the piling of the 59th Street Bridge, under the bridge foundation. This is actually right off the Strecker Lab. So actually when they renamed the island in 1973, and the mayor and the Roosevelt family came for that renaming ceremony, they actually took a ferry from Gracie Mansion to this ferry dock for that ceremony. So we would be essentially re-establishing a dock that was there. We want to do a pilot program because we think that ferry service to the entire island is really critical, not just here, but obviously I think your need for a ferry dock closer to the subway, the intermodal transportation hub, where the subway and the tram are, would be yet another stop that you would probably want to institute at some point in the future. But every ferry person, operator that we've spoken to has said, there's no ridership, we're not interested, no one's going to take the ferry, no one's going to do this. And so we would like to we would privately fund it, putting in a temporary floating spud dock that could be floated in, spud down, and then floated back out after the period of time in order to really collect some hard data for ferry service. You know that the city has issued, the EDC has issued a ferry study, an RFP for a ferry study. What we understand is that what's embedded in that ferry study is the Octagon stop. So we're trying to bring ridership down to the southern end and to the middle of the island, and I think that one way to really get a foothold in the process is to pay for a study, run a pilot program, and see ridership. And then you've got hard data. So I think that not only would it help alleviate some of the transportation to the parks, but it will also help, I believe, establish ferry routes to the island, because we'll be able to provide them with actual information. So we would do a ferry dock with a boat going to 34th Street with the possibility of linking over to Hunters Point if it makes sense. We've previously spoken to the guys that currently run the East River Ferry. They were not willing to extend the existing ferry route, that the northern arm of which is at Hunters Point, to Roosevelt Island, because it adds too much time onto their ferry route. So we would be running this as an entirely independent route, and then eventually we see that you could have a stop here, you could have a stop at the oil dock, and then you could have a stop at Hallett's Cove over by where Socrates Sculpture Park is, so you could link in Socrates Sculpture Park and the Noguchi Museum eventually as kind of the northern arm of the East River Ferry service.
I think it's a very exciting proposal. I don't recall if the Ocean and Coastal study, which was done back in October, talked about this particular site.
They did talk about this site. This was in their order of ranking. This was, my understanding, number 4, that they felt that where the Pier restaurant is in the West Channel was number 1, was the oil dock
was
2,
number 2,
Octagon 3, and this site was the last on their list. But you may remember that I had questioned the guy from Ocean and Coastal as to whether or not he'd spoken to the Coast Guard, because in the years that we've been discussing the ferry issue, it's my understanding the Coast Guard will not allow any other ferries in the West Channel at that limit, because it's so narrow and it's such a heavy shipping channel, and sometimes, as you know, the tugs lose control of the barges, which happened recently down in Waterside. One of them smashed into the wall, and it happened here 6 or 7 years ago where it smashed into the seawall. So they're very leery about putting in, allowing other ferry stops, and I think Bruce Becker was the last West Channel permit.
Okay. Would there be any problem having this permit fresh? Those are the right words.
We wanted to talk to you guys before we even went to DEC and talked about what we have to do for a permit to do a temporary ferry, because I don't want to have a conversation with them unless we sort of know, okay, yes, we can do this, and then we would find out, is it a temporary permit that then can get rolled into a permanent permit, or how does the permitting and the regulatory issues run? I don't know the answer to that, but we had preliminary conversations with DEC, like 2 years ago, just to sort of say, oh, at one point in the future we'd like to, and and they didn't have an issue.
It was just about a year ago.
Yeah, I guess it wasn't because you were
I was there.
Yeah. So that's kind of this is our first stop, and then our second stop would be to then talk to DEC about, okay, what is in fact required, and can we pull it off in time for summer?
Whose boats would we stop?
We would do the size of boats that you see for the New York water taxi, the yellow and black ones. They're 149 passenger ships. There's a smaller ferry, so there's a 49 and then a 149, and then once you get past the 149, you get into a whole other regulatory thing, which we don't want to get into right now.
Oh, I'm saying you guys would be running the boats?
Well, we would either run the boats, or we would we would contract with somebody to run the boats. I've got a friend who is very connected to the marine community in the city. Runs the marine division of the Kingsborough Community College, so he's got access to people. So we've been talking a little bit with him. We've been talking with the hornblower people. We've been speaking with the guys who run the harbor cruises. So there's a couple of different options, and it really comes down to, what's financially viable to do. Part of the reasons why ferries are never relied upon here is that they always require a heavy subsidy. So, I don't know what we're talking about in terms of costs and all of that. At this point, we estimate that just to do a little bit of upland work that would be required to sort of allow people to get onto the floating dock, to get onto the boat, and the rental of the temporary spud dock is going to run us about $150,000, and that doesn't include regulatory or permitting or boat. So it may turn out that we're not even financially able to swing it.
Okay.
We don't know yet.
So
Yeah.
you're saying that you would undertake the expense if you think it's worthwhile to manage it.
Yeah, we would undertake the expense, and we would either have somebody run the boat and take over that part of the operation, or we would be in some kind of agreement. I don't think it's going to be a money-making proposition.
But also the upland work, as you said.
The upland work we would take care of, yeah.
Okay,
And we've spoken with Langen Engineering, who's doing your seawall design, to make sure that we're not interfering with any of that. And they are fine with it. There's no problem with having this temporary thing. I think it would be even out of the water before you guys are ready to do any construction, if we did it this summer. So we'd love to start June 1st. I don't know that we're going to be able to pull the permits that fast and get everything lined up by June 1st, but maybe July, and then we would do July, August, September, and part of October maybe, depending on the weather. And
So
that's kind of the schematic plan.
If it were managed, it would be at minimum the ferry service between 34th Street and the site on the
Yes.
island.
Yep.
34th Street, you connect them to buses and so
Right,
forth.
and also to other ferries downstream.
Right, so you'd have to be, what's the right word, intermodal? No.
Yeah. Yep.
So there would be a transfer of some sort.
There would be a transfer.
A transfer and expense, and there's probably no
Right.
way of easing that. So basically.
Don't know, don't know. Would have to look into that. I don't know how they do it now, currently, but that's part of, what we'd have to find out.
No, we could find out, and always ask, and the city certainly is interested in.
Well, Scott Stringer is now behind the ferry issue, and I guess Carolyn Maloney is pushing hard again, and Jessica Lappin. Of course, we're gonna lose all these people at the end of the year, Jessica anyway, and Scott, but, you know, there is now kind of a wider push from the city itself to do it, and we would just wanna make sure Roosevelt Island gets in there, because
No,
you guys were part of the study initially, that pilot that they did, and then you guys were part of the, you know, Jessica, I think, had you in the beginning part of the study, and then you got moved back or something, I don't know, but, we are not, I mean, what my understanding is that Roosevelt Island is in the current RFP, but for the location at the Octagon, which I don't know if that's
Right.
how much that,
What happens in case of a hurricane?
you tie the boats down. I mean, that's what they've been doing with, that's what they did with the Staten Island ferry, and that's what they did with the other ferry boats. So I mean, you might have read that the ferry crews, at least for the Staten Island ferry, stayed with the boats.
Thinking of the dock.
Oh, with the dock. If we felt that we needed to, you could pull it up and move it in. You know, you could float it away if it needed to go away in terms of withstanding a hurricane. But I mean, it's got to be engineered, so presumably it would be able to withstand a hurricane.
I'm sorry, you're not on your committee.
No, it's quite all right. No,
I would say I'm generally in favor of an experiment like this, as long as it doesn't cost us a penny. But I need to be reassured. We've learned hurricanes are us around here, particularly in that part of the rock.
Mm-hmm.
And we're gonna need some very strong assurances that we're not gonna find that dock hurled up into the Strucker Lab someday after a hurricane.
Yeah, I think we miss hurricane season. I think we're
It
just
starts
at the
June 1st.
hurricane season starts June 1st. Oh, I'm off then, way off. Yeah, well, I mean, we would definitely talk to our
You can't
engineer.
answer the question now, we're gonna need to answer that question before we move forward.
well, if we, you know, again, if it's well engineered, so we have assurance
Right,
that the structure will withstand
right.
what with anything anticipated, and you're willing to float the expense of it, and you're willing to undertake this trial on land which was otherwise basically, you know, it's part of the park, but it's, you know,
Right.
not heavily used, right, by the Strecker Lab. I'm in favor of it.
Yeah, no, I think it's worth exploring and
Okay.
getting the appropriate approvals and see
Right.
what they
Okay.
say, you know, and seeing whether, you know, it is affordable or not.
Right.
I mean, you know, because there's been an ongoing controversy about ferry stores.
Well, that's the thing, and it's like you can't refute anything they say until you have any hard data.
Mhm.
And it makes it difficult, you know, to just pull numbers out of the air, and you know, they're not willing to talk unless we have some real information to give them.
Well, the real information would be very helpful. I mean, now that I'm thinking about it, yes, they did mention this, and one of the reasons why it was lower on the list is that you have no wake zone in the East Channel.
The people we've been speaking with don't know about that.
No,
anyway,
they
so-
don't.
Okay, well that was very
Yeah,
nice to find
exactly.
out.
Like they don't know what. Like, there
Several-
is
Well,
no wake area
Well,
from my
I thought there was
understanding.
restricted speed over in the East Channel, but if I'm wrong, that's wonderful.
It might be something they're trying to do now, but the people
Yeah.
that we've spoken with so far do not know anything about
Right.
that.
As far as
zone.
we know, there's no
Those of us
regulation.
who live on the East Channel love to watch speedboats racing up and down all summer
Those
long.
Right,
are
that's true.
The
so-
big
they go
cigarette
fast.
boats.
Right.
I was chuckling
Yeah.
because there was a picture of us
Yeah.
going through.
Yeah, I mean those guys are really fast. I think they want to institute a no wake zone, but they haven't.
I don't think there's really not any reason for it, actually.
Okay, so
Well, they wanted to do it, I think, because Gantry State Park, when they did their riprap edge, they didn't do it right, so it keeps eroding, and they've been having a lot of erosion problems over there. So it's really the push is coming from state parks for that no wake zone.
I mean, I think, you know, that if this ferry is gonna be used primarily to go to the parks and everything, I think if we're extended to Socrates Park and the Noguchi Museum, that would make it even more attractive for people.
Yeah, I think so
You know,
too.
where there's more than one stop.
And I
for
mean,
that
you know,
ferry.
I don't know what happens when you get up to the ferry stop, like where Gracie Mansion is. You know, because it's much wider there, and you know, there still is a dock there. I don't know. I don't think it's used any longer, except for maybe like the boat that goes to Yankee Stadium. But you could loop that in too eventually.
Mhm.
You know, so that you can service the Manhattan side.
I mean, it's conceivable that this would be more of a seasonal project,
it's conceivable.
you know. that
Although I
they
think
have
if you
better
establish
utilization.
enough ridership, I don't know I know that the East River Ferry pilot was wildly successful. I don't know what their winter numbers are, and I don't know if they cut their schedule.
They
That's
do.
do they? That's
In the
something we should
wintertime.
look into. But they still run the ferries, and I know in the summertime they're so busy they can't get everybody on a boat.
Mhm.
East River Ferry during Hurricane Sandy was open within 2 days. They went out and they basically tied everything up. They took anything that was movable off,
Yeah.
and they were back up in 2 days.
If those are not sputtered docks,
Well, they're floating docks still, but
they're not
yeah.
sputtered.
Right.
Hey,
Next question.
yeah.
As the RIOC consultants, the ocean coastal people said, from the point of view of Roosevelt Island residents, the South Point dock is probably the worst possible dock of the four. So if you're looking for data to determine whether or not a future Roosevelt Island dock is feasible, you're not going to get the appropriate data from a dock at South Point Park. So
Well,
just wanted you to factor that in there.
Contra-wise, if we get good numbers from that pilot program, that would infer even better usage at the other sites.
Right. I mean, you can extrapolate your information.
But
It's
not if
like
they're not
any
Roosevelt
data.
Island residents.
Oh, I disagree. I think actually some people will use the dock. I've
That's-
already had expressions of interest from people who work at the UN and people who work downtown to say, I can't wait till you put that ferry in so I don't have to take the other mode of transportation.
Yeah, there's a,
But that's not what the consultant said.
there's a bus
Where?
stop not far away, there's a red bus stop.
Right,
Yeah.
that's
Far
right.
away.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, you're eventually gonna need a dock, and the only place I see it happening is at the oil dock for the real, true intermodal transportation.
And unfortunately, that's just too expensive to actually start to
Yeah,
deal with
they, I
right
mean,
now.
the study that you guys did estimated that the rehabilitation of that dock was gonna cost $7 to $8 million. It's not, we can't do that for a temporary thing.
Yeah, I was wondering what hours of operation you were anticipating.
You know, we don't know. I think the park's gonna be open dawn to dusk, so we would do dawn, we would keep it in keeping with the hours of the park operation. So we're gonna start opening, I believe, April 8th. We're gonna be on a dawn to dusk now that we're in daylight savings time.
I was just thinking, following up what Rick said, it would determine what usage the residents would make.
Oh, in
of the
terms of
ferry
the
service,
commuter.
in terms of commuting, right?
You know, I think that if we've discovered that there are people who are like, hey, we would like a ferry that leaves at 7 o'clock in the morning, we add enough, if there was enough ridership, we could certainly easily add an extra run.
Interesting question.
Yeah. I
It's
mean,
easy enough
it's really
because we're not going to be part of the whole thing right now. We'll be here to there.
We'll go there to there, and then you'll have to catch either the public bus that's at 34th Street or another ferry
Right.
that goes further down the river.
For residents to get down there, it's a commitment of time,
Right.
assuming that the ferry will have the capacity to take all comers.
Right.
Because if they can't get on, then what
Right.
do you do?
Right. Well, that's also the problem up at the Octagon too.
Sure.
I mean, that's why the oil dock makes the best sense for a ferry stop, because then if you miss that, you get the tram. If you miss the tram, you go to the subway. And you can. It's all really close together.
Yeah, it's a nexus.
Yeah.
Any further questions? So we're in favor of this
Okay.
experiment, and we hope it succeeds.
We do too.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time, and thank you for letting us go first. I appreciate it.